I've seen some Ohio State fans dismissing the impact of the new 5 for 5 year eligibility rule for Ohio State, recently talking about how if this guy, the player, can't go to the league by the end of year 3 or 4, he isn't good enough to play for Ohio State. And point blank, that's just wrong. If a defensive or an offensive lineman is in his 5th year and you immediately think, he must not be good enough for Ohio State, then you need to hear this loud and clear right now. The new 5 for 5 year eligibility rule isn't a minor tweak to what's going on in college football right now. It's about to expose one of the biggest misconceptions in modern college football that many Ohio State fans are falling for now. Not say it was wrong before, but falling for now. And it starts with guys who play on the line of scrimmage. We're talking about guys like John Walker and several other Buckeye trench players to become the biggest winners in this entire rule change. And if we as fans don't adjust how we think about them fast, we're going to watch talented linemen keep leaving early and wonder why the lines of scrimmage never feel as dominant as other teams or as they should be. I know that sounds backwards for a lot of you. You're already thinking about first round offensive linemen who left after 3 years, but stick with me as we talk ball in the actual biology. I know everybody's gonna be excited about that, but the actual biology of how the human body builds real strength, the film on 5-year veterans and how that's different, and the way NFL general managers actually evaluate these players tell a completely different story. One that could decide whether Ohio State builds trenches that win in January or keep cycling through talent, but unfinished bodies never reach their full potential. In this episode, I'm ranking all 8 Ohio State seniors who had 1 year left, but now have 2 years left because of the 5-year eligibility rule. I'm showing you why the line of scrimmage guys, starting with John Walker first, benefit the most, breaking down exactly why linemen, offensive and defensive, need the extra time in development, and giving you the honest warning about what happens to this program if Buckeye fans and the Buckeye staff keep clinging to this old idea of leave early or you're a bust type of mindset. Because if we don't drop it, things are going to get worse on the field in ways recruiting rankings only won't fix. I'm JR with Buckeye Huddle. You're listening to the Buckeye Huddle podcast, where we get into it all with Ohio State, the Ohio State Buckeyes, mainly football. We'll talk some basketball here and there as well. And we aren't afraid to challenge the national bias or two here on this podcast. So if you haven't heard, a new rule has been passed to allow players to essentially stay in college for 5 years to play ball, and that's it. No more than that. No more players coming back or anything like that. Under the old system, most linemen had 4 years, sometimes 5 years, but essentially what you had was 4 seasons to play 5 years, 4 seasons to play 4 years. However, it turned out for you, redshirting, all that stuff was in there as well. The new age-based model gives them 5 full seasons inside a 5-year window that starts at enrollment or the year after they turn 19. For players who were sitting on 1 year of eligibility, that suddenly becomes 2. And the ones who play on the line of scrimmage just got the biggest development runway in all of college football. The old Ohio State fan assumption was simple. If a guy is still here by year 5, he must not be good enough to go pro early, which means he's not good enough for Ohio State. That thinking is not just outdated, it's actively backwards for positions that matter most in big games today. And I've seen a lot of fans say it, and even some podcasters who often have to come clean sometimes and say they're wrong about things, come out and say it as well, because they don't see the reality of where college football is at today. They're seeing college football either through the lenses of what was in the 2010s, the 2000s, or through their scarlet-covered glasses, which I get it, but it does us no good, and it does you no good as the fan, and that's what I want to do, is do right by you as the fan who watches and listens to the show. Well, I appreciate that, by the way, so please do like and subscribe and give us a 5-star rating on the podcast as well. But unlike skill positions that rely heavily on raw speed and explosiveness, that peak early offensive and defensive linemen require something called, for lack of better words, man strength, right? Quote unquote man strength. And to be honest with you, there's structural bone density that the human body simply does not finish building until a man's early 20s. You see, a 19 or a 20-year-old lineman is still a work in progress physically, no matter how talented he looks on film. Are there some exceptions? Of course, but there's not enough exceptions for the Ohio State, Georgia, Alabama, Oregon, USC, Texas A&M, you name your team that pays money, right? There's not enough of them to have the teams full of all of those guys on both the defensive and the offensive line. So, in case you missed your high school biology class, let me refresh you a little bit on the human skeleton. You see, the human skeletons don't reach peak bone mass and maximum structural thickness until between the ages of 25 and 30. So, for a 19-year-old defensive tackle or an offensive guard, the collarbone, shoulders, hips, and spine are still hardening inside their body. Years of heavy, consistent weight room work triggers intense mineralization, which helps with that. See, this is what this is the biology part I was talking about with the show. We'll be done with it soon. Don't worry. We'll get to the ball talk here in a sec. But by age 22 or 23, that frame is finally dense enough to absorb the brutal, repeated collision without breaking down. That's not theory. Those are just the facts. That's what science has found. On top of the skeleton comes mature muscle density. Teenagers and early 20s athletes can build big, explosive muscles, but not true, for like we call it, man strength. The isometric static anchoring power needed to hold the point of attack against a 320-pound opponent comes from a fully matured nervous system and dense muscle fibers that keep thickening into a man's mid to late 20s. You see, a 22-year-old has a significantly higher capacity for that brutal, unmoving strength than a 20-year-old does, even if it's only by 2 years, even if the 20-year-old tests higher in the 40-yard dash. So staying at a place like Ohio State for 5 years lets these players completely transform their bodies in one of the best strength programs in the country while logging thousands of live reps against elite offensive and defensive linemen every single day. Now, here comes the ball talk. We're done with biology for a little bit, okay? You players don't just, your players don't just get bigger at Ohio State. They get technically complete as well, especially with a defensive line coach as good as Larry Johnson. I'm talking about hand fighting, leverage, scheme diagnosis, counter moves. All that only comes from volume, and that most players who declare early for the draft on the line of scrimmage never actually accumulate. NFL scouts and general managers understand this better than a lot of fans do, and better than some coaches in college football do. They're under immense pressure to win immediately. A 23-year-old, 5-year veteran with thousands of snaps of proven film from the Power 4, maybe even the Power 2 level, is a finished product that they can plug and play week one. But a raw 21 or 20-year-old something underclassman, maybe they declared early or something, or they went to college early or something like that, no matter how athletic, is still a developmental project who may need 2 or 3 years on the bench to build a full NFL body that can contribute for the entire game. That's why 5-year linemen are increasingly viewed as as less risky and more high value selections rather than the consolation prizes. All right. I know you'll hate this example. Okay. But here's an example. Aidan Hutchinson is a good modern example. He stayed all 4 years at the team up north. He refined his frame and pass rush arsenal, and the Detroit Lions took him second overall. Now, sure, knowing other teams' plays surely helped him, right? We can't deny that. But he also immediately produced 9.5 sacks as a rookie because he was already a more complete player than some other guys who come out. Contrast that with what happens when elite Ohio State talent leaves early. You got a guy like Kayden McDonald, who had an elite season this year. He was a unanimous All-American, Big Ten Defensive Lineman of the Year. He declared after just 1 full year as a starter at 21 years old. The Houston Texans traded up to get him at 36 overall because they saw the massive ceiling that he has, but scouts saw that he relied heavily on raw power, his hand usage, and pad level still needed some work, and he was viewed as a slightly raw underclassman rather than a finished product who would last an entire season for them. He returned for another year or two, mastered some more of the technical side while continuing to add that dense man strength that he needs, he likely erases the question marks and becomes a first round lock instead of a mid second round pick. Now, positional, importance, kind of positional value gets into this as well, but at the end of the day, like, that kind of stuff is not just me speculating here. You go back and look at draft data. That's exactly how NFL evaluations work when the body and the game both have time to finish developing. So if the NFL teams see it, I'm quite certain Ryan Day and Matt Patricia and Arthur Smith, they're going to see it too. So with that, let's rank the 8 players for Ohio State who previously had 1 year of eligibility remaining, but now have 2, by who actually gains the most from having 2 years now instead of 1. One of them is a little bit iffy. I think I know the answer on it, but I'll talk to you later about that one when we get to him. Let's start with the clear winners, who are the ones on the line of scrimmage. Number 1, I mentioned him earlier, and it's not particularly close. Clear winner, John Walker, the 6'4", 300 and nearly 25-pound defensive tackle, transferred in from UCF with 1 year left and a current projection sitting at undrafted. That extra year at Ohio State is transformational for him. He gets to add the dense strength and technical polish that separates rational pieces from early down anchors, right? And a new scheme with elite coaching and daily practice against pro-level offensive linemen. Walker can go from a developmental big body to a plug-and-play NFL starter, especially now since he is at Ohio State and not UCF. That's the biggest relative stock jump on this entire list. Right behind him, the guy that comes up next is on the other side of the ball on the offensive line. He's Luke Montgomery. The interior offensive lineman already has significant experience and currently sits at about a 5th round projection in the draft. Obviously, we need to see how they play in the year, but going into the year, that's where he sits. Another full year of starting reps, strength gains, and mastering Ohio State's protection turned him from a solid mid-round prospect into something that could push for the top of the 4th round, maybe even squeak into the 3rd round, or at worst kind of be an early 5th round value. The offensive line is a position where extra experience and physical maturity compound the fastest. James Smith sits in a similar spot. The defensive tackle who came over from Alabama already has starter level experience and a 4th round grade. The extra year lets him fully adapt to the Buckeye system if he so chooses to use it. Like I said, 4th round grade right now. He might leave after this year, but we'll see. If you refine his pass rushing arsenal against the best offensive lineman in the country, and he can be a proven producer with starter type film, getting him ready for the NFL. That's the difference between a safe day 3 pick and someone who can push higher than that. And maybe even you get James Smith back next year. That would be great, and that would be another anchor for that defensive line. We'll see. Mason Williams at tight end also benefits significantly. He's coming in from the MAC, Ohio University, with an undrafted projection, kind of like Will Kazmarek did, right? The extra time in the power conference offense lets him sharpen his blocking technique and receiving skills against better competition. And tight ends who stay and develop into complete players routinely outperform their early projections. He's not quite in the trenches, but he's close enough to have that physical and technical runway that matters most when it comes to development. Then you have the skill players who've gained some value, but it's a marginal benefit because a lot of them are smaller and their physical peaks come earlier in the game and in their age than the bigger, stronger, lineman type of guys do. So first one in this, we'll go with Devin McEwen, 5th round projection. He gets a full year to prove he can produce in a loaded Ohio State receiver room after his strong group of 5 or group of 6, whatever you want to call it, performance. That helps, but wide receivers can often make the jump with one dominant season. Brandon Ennis, a 6th-round projection right now, is a reliable veteran who can use this extra year to increase his target share and stats if that so happens this year. Solid, but he was already kind of a known commodity. People kind of know what they're getting with him. Now, there's been some debate about if this rule applies to Brandon Ennis or not. The confusion regarding Brandon Ennis stems from this misunderstanding of the NCAA's new 5-for-5 eligibility rules, which gives athletes 5 full playing seasons over 5 years. Because Ennis never redshirted and played heavily as a true freshman in 2023, fans and some analysts out there are kind of assuming that he would be locked into the old 4-year clock rule and restricted to just the 2026 season due to the rules like no retroactive eligibility clause that it had in there, because they didn't want players who just graduated to jump into the portal. However, I was able to confirm that that clause only blocks players whose eligibility completely expired before June 2026. Originally, they thought they would pass this before then, but since it's been passed after, they put that clause in there to help. So currently enrolled athletes are grandfathered into whichever model benefits them the most. Consequently, Ohio State seniors like Brandon Ennis and even Jermaine Matthews Jr. are no longer restricted to the 2026 season and now possess the right to play two more seasons of full college football if they so choose, extending their eligibility throughout 2027. And that just so happens to be our next player, Jermaine Matthews Jr., a 5th-round projection, is young and talented. The extra year gives him a chance at a monster season next year, as a monster senior season, and potentially pushes him toward the top of the 5th or maybe into the 4th round. We'll see how well he does this season. Davison Igbinosun got himself all the way up to the 2nd round. So he's got a high upside, but the position doesn't require the same kind of late 20s physical maturation. He's going to be a similar player to what we've seen before already. Obviously, I'll improve in some ways, but not like he would on the offensive or defensive line. And then finally, we have Christian Allegro. 3rd-round projection is the veteran linebacker from Wisconsin with the highest current grade. The extra year adds leadership and depth, and he could maintain or slightly improve his stock, but because he's already viewed as a polished, productive player, the relative jump is smallest on his list. Now, this could change if he gets onto the line of scrimmage and plays there more, which could possibly happen this season, but for now, what we know about him, I'm going off of that. Now, there are other seniors on the roster, but guys like Carson Hinsman, Kenyatta Jackson, Bennett Christian, Terry Moore, Hunter Welsing, Bo Atkinson, Jacoby Jackson, and Earl Little Jr. are totally out of eligibility because they already used their red shirt, right? So don't count on them to return, but the pattern here is obvious. The players who play on the line of scrimmage, the ones whose bodies and techniques are still being built at age 21 and 22, gain the most from an extra year of eligibility possibility. So this is my big takeaway for Buckeye fans. If you're treating the 5th-year linemen like they're somehow failing or just not good enough because they're in their 5th year, we create exactly the pressure that forces talented players to leave early. We've already seen what that looks like with Kayden McDonald, a guy who had a fantastic season, was one of the best, if not the best lineman in the country with elite production, goes round 2. But the scouts still saw a slightly raw 21-year-old, and he slipped into the 2nd round. Multiply that across the trenches and you get thinner lines, more development projects on the roster, and less veteran leadership exactly where it matters most in November and December. And we don't want that. We want the lines to be strong because the lines are not skill position players. They require physical maturity. Biology actually backs this up. That cannot be rushed. When fans and outside noise push good players out the door before their bodies and their games are finished, Ohio State loses on-field production in the run game, in the pass game, protecting the quarterback, loses draft success stories that help recruit, and creates a cycle where the next wave of linemen feel the same pressure to declare early. That doesn't make us smarter fans. It makes the trenches less dominant. The 5-for-5 rule is giving us more finished products instead of more raw projects. You're looking at guys like John Walker, Luke Montgomery, James Smith. These are exactly the type of players who can come back after this season and could become NFL plug-and-play starters in year one if they do that. If we as a fan base embrace that instead of questioning why they're still here in year 5, we get better football, better long-term development, and if we don't, we're going to keep wondering why our lines of scrimmage never feel quite as physical or technically sound as a team like Georgia's or a team like Oregon or something like that in their best moments. The choice is yours. Are you going to choose to believe the tradition of college football and and that it is not actually ever changing or anything like that? Or are you going to believe real biology and player development that is not changing? That's the big question of whether Buckeye fans are willing to update how we evaluate one of the most important positions or on the field or not. Ohio State's trenches just got a massive development advantage with this rule change. John Walker and the other line of scrimmage players on the roster have the most to gain because their bodies and their games aren't finished at 21 years old. If we stop treating fifth-year linemen like they're somehow behind and start treating them as they are getting into being the finished product with the high-value pro potential they're becoming, this program builds exactly the kind of dominant veteran lines that wins championships. If you want clear, honest Ohio State Buckeye football analysis without the national media spin or outdated assumptions, subscribe and join the Buckeye Huddle. Like, subscribe, 5-star rating and review helps us as well. Drop your take in the comments. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.